Strength changes everything. And I don't just mean physically, you know. I don't just mean bigger muscles or your ability to lift heavy stuff. I mean the way you carry yourself, the way you think, the way you handle pressure, you know, the way you deal with stress, the way you start to see yourself when life gets difficult, you know. Because when you get stronger, mentally and physically, something happens that goes beyond the gym. You know, you start collecting evidence that you can do hard things, evidence that you can show up when you don't feel like it, you know, evidence that you can be comfortable in the uncomfortable and not quit, you know, evidence that you are not weak, lost, or stuck, you know, as part of you may have believed at some point. And all of this matters, you know. A lot of people are walking around with no real proof that they can rely on themselves. You know, they've broken promises to themselves too many times. They've started and stopped too many times. They've told themselves that they were going to change and then gone back to the same old habits, you know. And after a while, that affects the psychology, you know. Not just your body, not just your brain, not just your mind, but your identity, your confidence, your self-respect. You know, you start seeing yourself as someone who doesn't follow through. You know, someone who talks but doesn't act. Someone who wants to be better but doesn't do the thing that's going to make them better, you know. And strength training can be a cornerstone for all of this. It can change this, you know, because ultimately the weights, the cold steel and the iron don't care about what you say. The bar doesn't care about your intentions, and the gym doesn't reward excuses. You know, it responds to what you repeatedly do. You know, not what you post about, not what you tell people, but what you actually do. And that's one of the reasons I think strength training is so powerful. You know, it gives you honest feedback. If you train consistently, recover properly, and keep turning up, you improve, you know. And if you don't, then you don't. You know, there's nowhere to hide. You know, it can't be just acquired from somewhere in the click of your fingers. It has to be built day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, you know. And this is a humbling pursuit, but it can also be freeing, because once you understand, you know, you realize the principle applies to all other aspects of life. And you don't become confident by thinking about being confident. You become confident by doing the things that give you the evidence. You don't become disciplined by calling yourself disciplined. You become disciplined by repeating difficult actions until they become part of who you are, essentially. Yeah. You don't rebuild your life by waiting till you feel ready. You rebuild your life by doing the reps every single day, you know, even when you don't feel ready. And this is where strength changes more than just your body, but your mind. It teaches you a different relationship with effort. You know, you start to understand that progress is actually earned slowly. You stop expecting everything to change overnight. You become more patient, you know, you become more realistic. If you've got a strength goal and it's going to take you 10 years to get there, then you're going to become more patient, you know, more realistic, become more willing to do boring things for long enough that they actually pay off. And in today's world, because we're all so fast-paced and used to scrolling on shorts, and if your attention isn't garnered within 2 seconds, then you're just on to the next thing. And it's rare, it's exceptionally rare as rocking horse, as some people may say. You know, everything pushes instant results, Instagram. You know, if you don't instantly get 1 million likes, then you must be a failure. You know, fast transformations, before and after pictures, quick fixes, you know, motivation, now, hacks, shortcuts, financial freedom in 2 trades, you know. Strength doesn't work like any of that. You can't fake it for very long. You can't fake it at all, really. I mean, you can, but you'd have to use some pretty good editing. You can't pretend your way to a stronger bench press. You can't pretend your way to a stronger squat. You know, you can't cheat yourself into lifting a heavier deadlift. At some point, you just have to put the work in. And as I said before, it's rep after rep, week after week, session after session. Excuse me. And I think this process does something to you. You know, it builds trust. Not trust from other people, but trust in yourself. You start to believe, well, if I keep showing up, I can change. If I keep showing up, doing the work, I can get stronger, I can improve. If I keep handling the difficult and hard things, I can become someone stronger. And once you feel that in the gym, it starts to leak into other areas of life. You can start thinking, well, if I do this here, where else can I do this? If I can rebuild my body, can I rebuild my confidence? Can I rebuild my art career? Can I rebuild my writing career? Can I rebuild my IT career? If you can commit to training, can you commit to other areas of life? If you can push through discomfort underneath a barbell, can you push through discomfort in business or in relationships or creativity, fatherhood, or just life in general? And I think the answer is yes. Not because lifting weights magically fixes everything, it certainly doesn't. Strength training and lifting weights isn't some magic potion you can take which is going to fix your entire life. It won't pay your bills, it won't fix all your relationships, and it won't remove stress. It certainly won't make life easier, but it changes the person who has to deal with all of those other things. A stronger body often creates a stronger mind, and this isn't an automatic trade-in thing, but through the process, through repetition, through the struggle, through doing something difficult on purpose, a lot of people need this, especially men, because if you feel weak, passive, directionless, anxious, or just like, life is just happening to you, one of the most powerful things you can do is actually to get stronger. Not because you need to be obsessed with the gym, I'm not obsessed with the gym, not by any stretch of the imagination, but because your own worth depends on what you do with yourself and your time. Not because your worth depends on the numbers you hit in the gym, not because everybody needs to be a powerlifter, but strength gives you a foundation to build from. It gives you structure, it gives you feedback, it gives you discipline, it gives you a place to put your frustration, and it gives you a reason to look after yourself, essentially. I should say subscribe. I'm uploading daily at the moment, all things strength, discipline, rebuilding your life, mindset, self-improvement, and so on. And the psychology of man or human. But yeah, back to the video. Strength is a way, in which it allows you to look after yourself, to respect yourself, to move the needle forward in one area of life in which you have full control, or at least 99.9% control over. It gives you a way to measure progress when the rest of your life may feel messy. When you start to see numbers going up, when your body starts changing, when your posture changes, when your energy changes, when you realise you're capable of more than you perhaps thought, that matters. It can change how you walk into rooms. It can change how you deal with difficult days. It can change how you respond to stress. It can change how much you respect yourself. And self-respect is massive these days, If you don't respect yourself, you'll tolerate things you shouldn't tolerate. You'll speak to yourself badly. You'll avoid difficult decisions. You'll accept less than you should accept. Strength training teaches you something that, things have to be built from the inside out. Nobody can lift the weights for you. Nobody's going to go to the gym, do the reps for you. Nobody can build your body for you. And in a strange way, that's quite encouraging, I think, because it means you have to take part in the activity. You have a part to play. You're not helpless. You're not just waiting. You can start. You can train at home. You can stand up right now and do 5 squats. You can start with press-ups, easy variation press-ups, standing press-ups, leaning against a wall. You can start with dumbbells, start with a barbell, start with just walking or a resistance band. You can start wherever you are in life. And the point is, you begin proving to yourself, that over time, small bits of action stack and compound and build over time. One session becomes 2, 2 becomes 10, 10 becomes a habit, and the habit becomes identity. And eventually you're not just someone who trains, you're someone who keeps promises to yourself. The strength numbers are part of it, definitely, but ultimately the numbers that you lift are not, they don't mean much in the grand scheme of things. It's everything else that comes with it, unless of course you're a competitive lifter, then of course the numbers are going to be the biggest thing, or at least a huge thing. But it's about building the habit. This is where the real change happens. The body is of course part of it, the numbers are part of it, the confidence is part of it, underneath, the deeper thing is that you become someone you can trust, yourself. And once that starts happening, everything else feels way more possible, you know. So essentially, yes, strength can change everything, does change everything, you know. Not because the gym is the answer, but because, you know, getting stronger gives you the evidence that you're not finished. You know, you can still change, you can still rebuild, you can still build, you can still become more capable, still become harder to break, you know. And if you feel stuck right now, you know, maybe one of the best places for you to start is to just simply get stronger. You know, not just for your body, but for your mind, for your confidence, for your discipline, for your future. Because strength doesn't fix everything, but it changes the person who has to deal with everything.